I'm gonna show you a video of something that literally would be probably our worst nightmare, bro. It's real life.
Okay, let me see.
It comes from this YouTuber from Belgium. His name is Zeus, and he's known for urban exploring. He does it alone most of the time, but this time he did it with a couple of friends. So this is them getting to the spot, and as you can see, they're already noticing weird stuff. They hear dogs.
Okay.
Dit is wel spannend, ja. Pak hem op. Echt. Oh, man. Nee.
I was bro smiling through that.
Ingang.
Boom.
De poort.
Oh, like the warning sign?
Privaat, dit is een plaats van gebed. Gelief ons rust.
Right here, the other times that he went to that spot, this wasn't there. And it says private property, do not enter. So they start walking back, but then they hear somebody.
What the fuck? What the fuck?
Watch what he says.
Hier wordt letterlijk iemand gemarteld. Hier wordt letterlijk iemand gemarteld in de bos.
Yo, is this some sacrificial, like, clan sh?
In the sign, we missed it too, but it said religious practices are being practiced ahead. That's why it was private property.
No way, bro.
Hallo? Hallo? Hallo?
Oh! Yo, that's chills, bro.
Bro.
Hey!
So he ends up basically calling the cops. He still hides and shit. At this point, he's separated from his friend group.
The worst case scenario.
I guess to a point when the cops get there, and then that's when they see that it's this lady, and she had a fucking hatchet in her hand. See, the cops are there. She ripped the plate off.
The movie Girl in the Basement is based off one of the most disturbing cases ever, so let's explain it. In 1984, 18-year-old Elizabeth Fritzl vanished from her home in Austria. Her parents reported her missing, and for years, her whereabouts remained a complete mystery. But the truth was more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Josef Fritzl, Elizabeth's own father, had lured her into the basement of their family home and imprisoned her there. He told the rest of the family and police that she had run away to join a cult. What no one knew was that Josef had built a hidden soundproof cellar beneath their home, complete with a reinforced steel door, coated locks, and no natural light. This would become Elizabeth's prison for 24 years. During that time, Josef repeatedly raped and abused her, eventually having 7 children with her. 3 of those children were raised in captivity with her. 3 others were brought upstairs by Josef, claiming they had been mysteriously left on the doorstep with notes from Elizabeth. 1 child died shortly after birth and was incinerated by Josef in a furnace. Elizabeth and her captive children were finally discovered in 2008 when one of the children, Kirsten, then 19, became seriously ill. Josef reluctantly allowed her to be taken to the hospital, which triggered an investigation. Elizabeth was freed and the truth unraveled. In 2009, Josef Fritzl was sentenced to life in prison for murder, rape, incest, enslavement, and false imprisonment. So, if you're still interested in this case, go watch the movie Girl in the Basement.
So I've been in India for the last 5 days, and I was just in Germany and Amsterdam. Last week, we've been chasing down the trail of one of America's most infamous criminals that got away. This is a guy that was abusing children in America. He fled the country, and we've been able to track where he went from America, which includes Germany, Amsterdam, all throughout Europe, England. We visited some of his spots, like interviewed people that had seen him and had encountered him there, and we chased him all the way here to India, where tomorrow we're going to be speaking with victims of his from the middle of nowhere here in India. It has been absolutely insane, but I'm saying all this because we're not going to have a video tomorrow on Monday. I have been editing, but I just won't be able to get it done, I don't think, until Tuesday. So everybody, please bear with me. This project has been absolutely insane and so rewarding, terrifying, exciting, fulfilling. And yeah, we'll be back on Tuesday with a new video. It's super exciting. It's the Black Swan Inn. I don't have a video there. I had to take down my last one from years ago, but we were joined by Elton and Overnight. They actually invited us out, so it's an incredible video. But yeah, watch out for the trailer tomorrow, and then I'll see y'all on Tuesday once I have just a little bit extra time to edit and make this video perfect. Anyways, y'all, good night.
Imagine spending 38 years in prison for a murder you didn't commit. This man's only just been released in what's being called the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history. So let's rewind, because there are two massive victims in this case. It was the 1st of August 1986 in Seacombe in Wirral, and Diane Sindel was 21. She had a partner that she was engaged to, and she was a super hard worker. She was trying to earn some extra money to go towards the wedding fund. She was actually pretty well known in the area because her family had a successful floristry business, and she'd regularly help them out with deliveries to the locals. Like I said, for extra money, she was working super hard. She actually worked in a pub called the Wellington Pub in Bebington. That's when she was last spotted alive. She left the pub on the evening in question and never made it home. A taxi driver witnessed what he later reported to the police as a man and a woman having an argument just after midnight on the side of the road. Then, ear witnesses reported hearing screams. Horrifically, the following day, a dog walker made a grim discovery. The poor woman's lifeless body was discovered in an alleyway. She was partially unclothed and had been beaten and battered. The post-mortem revealed absolutely horrific injuries, a fractured skull, facial bruising, along with mutilated breasts and lacerated private parts. Honestly, this was an abhorrent murder. Horrifically, the medical examiner stated she had been alive for a while after the brutal attack, and he stated these were the very worst injuries he'd ever seen outside of a road traffic accident. So how on earth did an innocent man get put in prison for this murder? The following day, the victim's clothing was discovered. Someone had tried to set them on fire, presumably to conceal evidence. And one eyewitness reported seeing a male hiding in bushes, and they thought he was someone called Pete. So local man Pete Sullivan was arrested and was soon pressured to confess by police. He was denied access to legal representation and was arrested for murder. But a psychologist said his assessment of him had highlighted his, quote, limited intellectual capacity, end quote, and deemed him to be vulnerable. However, he was quickly labelled in the media as the Beast of Birkenhead and the Mersey Ripper. Police claim that he confessed to the murder, but there was a lot of back and forth. It was like he's confessed, then he's withdrawn it, then he's confessed again. It was giving Brendan Dassey. And if I've learned anything from things on Netflix like Making a Murderer and confession tapes, it's to never believe it when police say there's been a confession. Dental experts claimed during his trial that bite marks on the victim's body could be matched to Peter's teeth, but this is not an exact science at all. He was found guilty of Diane's murder and banged up for 38 years. He's now 68 years old and has only just been freed. This came after a sample of bodily fluid from the scene from the victim was retested and revealed a DNA profile which did not match him. An innocent man had been in prison all this time. His conviction has now been quashed and he's received just $200,000 in compensation. And let's not forget, at the end of this, Diane's real murderer is still out there and still has not faced justice.
At the beginning of this year, a 12-year-old boy was sent to Trails, Carolina, which is a troubled teen wilderness camp, and less than 24 hours later, he was killed. He was smothered to death after the counselors enclosed him in a bivvy, which is like a one-person camping tent. They're really small and typically have packed weights in them. On the evening of February 2nd, the boy, who's only been identified by his initials, CJH, was taken to the camp in Lake Toxaway after his parents paid for two strangers to take him from his home in New York. The camp states that they are a wilderness therapy program that serves kids with behavioral issues and those who have ADHD, autism, and PTSD. On his first night there, counselors stated that the boy was placed in a bivvy without incident. At this specific camp, the bivvies are placed on plastic sheets, and the sides are then folded up kind of like a canoe, so this is already dangerous. Bivvies include a breathable mesh inner layer that can be zipped, and an opaque waterproof outer layer that is basically a little door. Trails Carolina camp protocol requires that the top of the bivvies be covered with an alarm device that will alert the counselors if the kids try to get out. Well, the mesh on this little boy's bivvy was torn, so the counselors confined him in with a weather-resistant door, and then they put the alarm system on top of that door. It's important to note that bivvies typically come with a warning label that tells you not to close this outer layer all the way because it could cause breathing problems. So while the boy was inside, he was moving around a lot and making a lot of noise, so the counselors took him out. Once out, the boy was able to relax and fall asleep, but the counselors woke him up and forced him back inside the bivvy. The camp states that they could hear him moving around until 1 a.m., and then it went silent. The counselors reportedly did routine checks on the kids, but with the little boy's bivvy being closed all the way, they couldn't see inside. They just figured he was okay. day. But the next morning, they couldn't wake the boy, and when they opened the bivvy, they found him with his head in the enclosed corner of the bivvy and his feet at the opening of the door. He was found to only be wearing half of his clothes, so it suggested that he possibly suffered from hypothermia because of the construction of the sleeping area. It could have made him feel hotter than he was, but the counselors said that he was cold to the touch. They said they tried doing CPR, but it was too late. The autopsy states that his cause of death was asphyxiation due to smothering, and his manner of death is homicide. The medical examiner stated that the alarm placed on his bivvy and the plastic sheet surrounding it were factors that caused him to not be able to properly breathe. The report shows no sign of trauma or sexual assault, and there was no evidence of drugs or any natural causes that could have led to his death. He died as a direct result from being placed in a damaged bivvy by others with no way to get out. The camp has previously denied any responsibility and immediately after his death released a statement saying they were shattered and cooperating with authorities. They fully believe that this was accidental and even launched their own investigation into the boy's death. But the Transylvania County Sheriff's Office say that that's not entirely true and that the camp hasn't completely cooperated with them. The camp has since been shut down and had its license revoked. It's not clear if any charges will be filed, but authorities are conducting a criminal investigation into the boy's death. No arrests have been made, but police say that they do have suspects. These troubled teen wilderness camps need to all be shut down. In many cases, kids that are forced into these camps are abused physically and sexually and severely neglected. This little boy had ADHD, anxiety, and faced social challenges like making friends. I can't imagine his last moments and how terrified he must have been.
Have you ever heard the superstition about a welcome mat outside of your door?
No.
You shouldn't have one. Reason is because
Let me guess. It's gonna fucking invite entities into your...
you're basically inviting anything to come inside your house. Meaning you're inviting demons, evil spirits.
I never heard that before.
Yeah, bro, because you're inviting it in.
Alright, so do you think that rubs off and like it brings evil people try to break in, rob?
Maybe you could just bring all the bad energy but again, that's just a superstition, bro, that people believe, oh, it's bad to have a welcome mat. Some people are just like, it's just a mat, bro. It's not that serious.
You already know the comments gonna be like, bro, I can't have anything no more. I have one right now.
That ass, bro. I know a lot of people out there have a welcome mat, bro. So just be aware if some weird shit starts happening in your house, bro, some ghost activity, maybe it's because of your welcome mat.
Annabelle, the allegedly haunted doll, is in town. She was on display inside the Victoria's Black Swan Inn. The doll is believed to be possessed by a demon.
The most haunted place in San Antonio.
Victoria's Black Swan Inn.
You want to be in a live horror movie? This is the place to be.
In 1987, Joanne Rivera moved into the house, and almost immediately after moving in, strange things started happening.
We've had multiple deaths around the property, on the property. Some of their bodies were actually left here. We're the kind of place you either fall in love with it or you don't like it at all. This is my least favorite part of the whole house. Did you hear the tapping? What was it?
I've been trying to not breathe.
Okay.
You can feel them watching you. You can feel the energy.
One of the most haunted, Victoria's Black Swan Inn.
Abigail.
One of the most haunted places in Texas, Victoria's Black Swan Inn.
And when you say all, you really call this kind of a conduit, a switchboard to talk to the people in the afterlife.
Exactly. If you spend enough time here, you'll be able to talk to just about anybody you want to.
Whoa! Whoa! What was that?
In the bed.
Ooh.
Okay.
What may look like a closet really isn't. What it is a portal.
The Black Swan Inn.
Yeah, that place is one of the top 10 haunted sites in Texas.
2 years ago, a young man visited his cousin's remote cabin in upstate New York. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just miles of forest in every direction and an eerie, unnatural silence at night. Around 3 a.m., he suddenly woke up, not from a noise, but from the overwhelming sensation that something was watching him. He sat up in bed, and that's when he saw it. Crouched at the foot of his bed was a creature, pale, almost gray, with skin stretched tightly over a skeletal frame. Its limbs were too long, fingers nearly brushed the floor, its head tilted slightly, watching him with unblinking, pitch-black eyes. He froze, every muscle in his body locked with fear. The thing didn't move, not even to breathe. Then slowly, it smiled. A wide, unsettling grin that revealed jagged, splinter-like teeth. Still staring directly at him, it began crawling backwards towards the edge of the bed. It never turned its head, it never broke eye contact, and then it slipped underneath the bed. He didn't move an inch until daylight. When he finally told his cousin what had happened, his cousin didn't doubt him, not for a second. He told him quietly, "You're not the first to see it. They say the creature is called the Rake." There were no footprints, no signs of a break-in, nothing to prove it had ever been there. But ever since that night, the young man swears he still hears faint scratching beneath his bed, like it's waiting for him to fall asleep again.
In July of 2007, this entire family, who was part of a doomsday cult, mysteriously disappeared. Let's talk about it. So this is Simon Cadwell, his partner Chantel McDougall, their 5-year-old daughter Leela, and their friend Antonio Popic. Simon was an internet doomsday cult leader who published books about his beliefs, and he created a website called the Truth Fellowship. He had a pretty large following too. They all lived in a house on a remote property in a small town in Western Australia called Nannup. They disappeared in the summer of 2007 after telling friends and family that they were moving to Brazil to join a spiritual community because they felt that they didn't belong in modern society. But in the months leading up to their disappearance, Simon told a woman in his online cult forum that he was planning a peaceful family suicide pact, and after, Antonio would bury their bodies in bushes before killing himself in the wilderness so no one would find his body either. When the woman questioned why he would be okay with killing his young daughter, Simon backtracked and said that they would just move to an isolated area where no one could ever reach them. Those who knew Simon said he was strange and controlling and at the time was on antipsychotic medication. Those same people also said that Chantel and Antonio were brainwashed by him and would do anything he said. The beginning of this strange mystery starts in May of 2007 when Simon was pulled over while driving. Someone had tipped off the police stating that Simon wasn't who he said he was. And when police looked into this, they discovered that he had stolen a birth certificate from a former coworker and had stolen his identity. In all reality, Simon's real name was Gary Felton, and he had fooled everyone for the longest time. So during that traffic stop, police were questioning his driver's license, which made Simon panic. 2 months later, the entire family would vanish. Right before their disappearance, Simon and Chantel sold their cars for somewhat cheap, and Chantel cashed the check for that at the bank on July 13th. The next day, which was their last known sighting, Chantel met with a woman to sell her 2 of the family's pet dogs. The woman who bought the dogs was originally supposed to meet up with Chantel the next day, but when she called Chantel, Chantel said, quote, "No, you must come today." The woman said that Chantel appeared super anxious and that the entire encounter made her feel so uncomfortable. A few days later, their landlord went to their Nannup house, and it was an eerie scene. The house was spotless, and all of their personal belongings were gone. The only thing left behind was half a bowl of rice and 2 notes, one from Antonio and one from Chantel, who said that the entire family moved to Brazil. They were reported missing sometime later, and what police found during their investigation only brings more questions. Just 2 days before they disappeared, a call was made from their Nannup home to Transwa, which is a public transportation company in Australia. Whoever called booked a bus ticket from Bridgetown to Northcliffe under the name of J. Roberts, but it was never used. But 2 tickets under that same name were used the morning of July 16th. One going from Perth to Kalgoorlie and one from Perth to Northcliffe. A passenger under the name of J. Roberts did get off at Northcliffe and someone did board a train to Kalgoorlie, but there's no evidence of anything after this. The day before, Antonio's phone traced to Perth and it was used to call a Domino's Pizza and a hotel. His driver's license was also used to check into a hostel in Northbridge. This was confirmed to be him, as the Domino's driver confirmed Antonio was the guy he delivered the pizza to that night. As the other 2 tickets were being used the morning of the 16th, Antonio called Transwa for reasons unknown, and then he too vanished off the face of the earth. The investigation wasn't handled properly and lots of things slipped under the rug, like how a woman's shirt that possibly belonged to Chantel was found in a field in Northcliffe 3 months after she disappeared. The person who found it said it smelled like rotting flesh. This lead wasn't investigated until 2015, 8 years later, and at this point, a wildfire had come through and burnt everything up. In 2011, a Gary Felton checked into a caravan park in King River, which is near Albany. Authorities hunted down every Gary Felton in the country, but nothing ever came of it. Chantel's family is currently trying to raise funds to launch a new investigation to find them. They've even created a GoFundMe to help. At this point, her family believes that Chantel and Leela are likely dead and buried somewhere in Western Australia. This case has left me with so many questions. Did the entire family move to Brazil like they said? Are they living off-grid under different names? Did they take their own lives, or were they possibly murdered? So many questions remain unanswered. Their bank accounts have not been touched since the day they disappeared. Whatever happened to this family remains a mystery 17 years later.
I'm convinced it's this family murderer who inspired Chris Watts to kill his own family. Some of the details are just eerily similar. This is a disturbing case of the Longo family. It was the 19th of December 2001 in the beautiful US state of Oregon. A man was walking along an estuary when he spotted a strange-looking object floating in the water. Now, he didn't want to panic, but he felt like this looked very suspicious. He almost felt like it looked like a small body, so he decided to call police just to be safe. Soon after, when emergency services raced to the scene, his worst fears were confirmed. Horrifically, from the water, they pulled the body of a 4-year-old boy. Now, this was Zachary Longo, and the nightmare was just beginning. The Longo family included Christian, the dad, who worked at a local Starbucks, the mum, Mary Jane, who was a stay-at-home mum, and their 3 beautiful young children. The couple had been married around 8 years and had recently moved to Newport. Now, following the discovery of the child's body and a tip off a member of the public, police knew they had to go to this family home to see what on earth was going on. Now, it was very strange that nobody had reported this child missing, so the investigators were fearing that possibly the entire family had either drowned maybe in an accident, or maybe there'd been a car crash and the car was submerged or something, and soon they'd find more victims. But the family home looked totally normal. After forcing entry, they didn't find anything to concern them. It was like the whole family had just up and left. So it was back to the drawing board. Meanwhile, divers continued to search for a potential vehicle in the water. That's when another horrifying discovery was made. The body of 3-year-old Sadie Longo, again submerged in the water. And something was really disturbing about the discovery of Sadie's body. There was a giant rock tied to her ankle. This was no accident. Clearly somebody had wanted to hide these bodies. There was huge media coverage by this point, and a member of the public actually came forward to help. He said that on the 17th, so just 2 days prior to the discovery of the first little child, he saw a man at 4:30 a.m. on a bridge who had his brake lights on, and the member of the public had wondered if he needed help, so he stopped his vehicle. The witness asked the man, "Do you need any help? Are you okay?" And he just seemed evasive and said that he didn't need any help. The witness gave police a description of this man, and hauntingly, police believed it was at this point that the man on the bridge was in the middle of throwing the children into the river. But police were still no closer to finding where the rest of this family was. Meanwhile, investigators started doing some digging into the family dynamics, and they did find some concerning information. Christian, the dad, had been struggling massively with money issues. His excessive spending had put huge pressure on this family and actually forced them to move. He'd had cars repossessed and apparently tried unsuccessfully to turn to fraud to stay afloat, even to the point where he was taken to court. Not only that, but Mary Jane confided to a close friend, and not only that, but Mary Jane confided to a close family member that she'd been devastated to find out that Christian had been talking to another woman online. She'd found emails between the pair, and Christian didn't even deny it. He admitted to it. But the pair decided to stay together. With 2 bodies now found in the water, divers continued to search for the missing family. And lo and behold, days later, a large suitcase with hair poking out of the zip was found. After dragging it from the water, they found Mary Jane inside, nude and deceased. Finally, tiny 2-year-old little Madison was also found dead in a suitcase in the water. Now, there was actually some debate about how the victims died. They'd obviously been submerged, and that can make it really difficult to tell. Some reports claim that they'd all died from asphyxiation, but some horrifically claim it was more likely that Zachary and Sadie were alive when they were thrown into the water with weights weighing them down. So where was the dad in all this? Because he really could be the final piece of this puzzle. Well, Christian had stolen credit card information from a customer at Starbucks and fled to Mexico. Police were hot on his tail. They plastered his photos all over the FBI most wanted list. Meanwhile, Christian seemingly thought he could get away with just starting a new life. He was partying on beaches, he was making new friends and chatting to tourists. He'd even got a new love interest that he'd found over there. Bear in mind, this was just weeks after his family was murdered. But strangely, Christian had concocted this plan to pose as a new identity. He decided to pretend to be Michael Finkel, who was a New York Times reporter that he admired. But it wasn't long before his gig was up. A witness called police to say that they'd seen a guy on the run, and Christian was eventually arrested in January in Tulum. And bizarrely, Christian actually made friends with this Michael Finkel, this reporter, and Michael seemed to believe that Christian was innocent. At Christian's trial, he actually managed to make what he had done even worse. He decided to claim that Mary Jane was the one who killed the kids. He said that they'd had an emotional conversation, which is actually what Chris Watts had said, if you remember, and that he killed her in retaliation. He said he then realized Madison was still alive, was still breathing, but he thought of her as dead at that point, so he decided to suffocate her to death. It was honestly the most bizarre story. It also didn't explain why he would A, not report this to police immediately, and B, flee to Mexico, find a new girlfriend and just be completely fine. It also didn't explain evidence on his computer, which prosecutors claimed backed up the claims that he had planned the murders. Thankfully, he was found guilty and was given the death penalty, although this was changed to life without parole at a later date.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I died in my bath, electrocuted by my phone while on a video call with my best friend. My name is Maria Antonietta Cutillo, and I was from Italy. This all happened on the evening of May 3rd, 2023, when I was just 16 years old. I was on a call with Fabi, my best friend, talking and laughing together as we usually did. But suddenly I felt an indescribable pain and screamed my friend's name just before dying. My best friend, powerless to the scene and having seen everything, immediately contacted the emergency services. But it was already too late. I was dead, electrocuted instantly. What caused my death was mainly the fact that my phone was charging at the same time. My best friend witnessed my last breath while I was screaming her name on the video call. She even made a very touching TikTok video about it to express her sadness over this event that cost me my life. To you who are watching this video, never use your phone in your bath. It could happen to anyone.
I murdered my entire family for a cam girl. I am Grant Amato. At the time, I had a normal life in Florida with a close-knit family. Then, one day, I fell into an obsession with a Bulgarian cam girl named Sylvie. It started as a simple indulgence, but it spiraled out of control. I emptied my savings, family funds, everything, for virtual interactions with her. Of course, my family found out. They were furious, disappointed. They gave me an ultimatum: stop this madness or be cut off. And you know what? I chose Sylvie. I severed ties with my family, even stole money from my own brother to feed this virtual obsession. Yeah, you got it right. I was completely lost. The situation worsened. My family tried to bring me back to reason, but I was so immersed in this virtual life that I couldn't turn back. And one day, everything changed. My family was found murdered at home. They said I did it. Imagine being accused of killing your own family. It's the craziest thing that could happen, right? In the end, I was found guilty. My whole life turned upside down because of this unhealthy obsession. Today, I'm here in prison, wondering how I got to this point.
I burned my husband after he raped our 7-year-old daughter. My name is Tatanisha Hedman, and one evening when I finished work early, I wanted to surprise my family, and as I walked into the house and past my daughter's bedroom door, I heard her crying in the background. When I opened the door, I discovered that my husband, Vincent Phillips, was raping her. My first thought was to take the gun and kill him, but that was far too kind of punishment for what he'd just done. So I waited until he was fast asleep before entering the room with a can of gasoline, poured it all around the bed, took a lighter, and lit the fire. Very quickly, the room was completely engulfed in flames, and then I fled. I was quickly arrested, and unluckily my husband didn't die, but was taken to hospital with serious burns. I was sentenced to 12 years in prison in 2012, but I don't regret what I did. I did what I thought was best to protect my daughter and avenge her. Some people think that what I did was perfectly justified and that I was right to do it, and other people think I'm a monster, and what do you think?
This is the scariest story about Do Not Open. There was an 18-year-old girl named Mia who was in her first year at college. She lived alone in an apartment near her university. One night when she was doing the dishes, she got a call from her friend Pete. She picked it up and he said, "I'm bored, I want to hang out." Mia said, "Yeah, me too, come over." Pete then said he'll be over in 15 to 20 minutes. She then hung up and decided to take a shower. Mia was in the middle of shampooing her hair when she suddenly heard a loud banging on the door. She stuck her head out of the shower and said, "Come in, it's open." But a few minutes later, the banging on the door started again. She then stuck her head out of the shower again and said, "Come in, it's not locked." Just then, her phone started to ring and it was Peter. Mia said, "I'm in the shower, why don't you stop knocking and just come in?" Peter's voice sounded extremely scared and he said, "Do not open the door." Mia said, "Why not?" "I'm outside your apartment building," whispered Peter. "And I just saw a strange woman coming up the stairs to your apartment covered in blood and holding a knife. And she was smiling weirdly and didn't look human at all."
I glued the mouth and eyes of my 1-year-old daughter with super glue. My name is Johnny Lee Carter, and I was 29 years old in 2018 when I committed an unthinkable act to stop my daughter's crying, while I was supposed to take care of my little girl who was just 1 year old. While my wife was out shopping, she wouldn't stop crying, and I tried to calm her for a long time, but to no avail. She kept crying. Her screams became unbearable and drove me to a rage. Then I tried to strangle her, but she started screaming even more, and I was even less able to calm her down. That's when I saw a tube of glue next to me. I grabbed it, and without thinking, I put some on her eyes and mouth. Then I realized what I had done and fled. A few moments later, her mother returned, discovering the horror I had committed. She immediately called emergency services who were able to repair all the damage I had caused. And my daughter will have no lasting effects from what I did. A week later, I was arrested by the police more than 100 kilometers from our home where I had fled. What punishment do you think I deserve?
This is what it looks like crashing at different speeds, and it's absolutely mind-blowing.
This is the heartbreaking final request this girl made before she was brutally killed. It was 2008 and Eve Carson was 22 years old. She was living in North Carolina and was a student at the university. She was incredibly passionate about helping others and participated in many organisations, including a hunger relief organisation. In the early hours of the morning on March the 5th, 2008, things would take a very dark turn. Lawrence Levette, aged 20, had an extensive criminal background. On the night in question, he rang one of his friends called Jason and asked him to drive him and his friend to Chapel Hill to rob someone. Jason actually declined this, so Lawrence and his friend Demario Atwater went on their way to find a victim. At around 3:30 a.m, Eve had actually been going to her car to get something. At this point, the pair decided to strike. They forced their way into her car and held her at gunpoint. They took her to some cash machines and forced her to take out money for them. She tried to reason with the men and just say, you've taken my money, now please just let me go. However, they showed no mercy and decided they had to kill her because she'd seen their faces. They drove her to a wooded area and, heartbreakingly, it seemed like Eve realised what was about to happen. Upsettingly, she asked the pair to pray with her. They then callously shot her 5 times. Locals in the area reported to police that they had heard gunshots. Eve's body was found shortly after, and it wasn't long before police started scouring CCTV. Police identified the killers and they were sentenced to life in prison. This is the disturbing case of Robert Moan that stunned Scotland. Robert Moan was born in Dundee. He reportedly had a difficult upbringing and was abused by his dad throughout his childhood. He was bullied and ultimately was expelled from school. He served in the army and reportedly turned to alcohol to cope with depression. On the 1st of November 1967, Robert was 19 years old. He'd been drinking in a pub that day and decided to take revenge on the school that had expelled him. He was dressed in uniform and armed himself with a shotgun as he entered 26-year-old Nanette Hansen's class. It was a class of 11 girls aged between 14 and 15. Nanette was pregnant with her first child at this time. He subjected the students and their teacher to a 1.5-hour ordeal. He R'd one girl and SA'd another before brave Nanette convinced him to let the girls go. However, before doing so, he made Nanette turn around and shot her in the back. She died on her way to hospital. After the murder, Robert was deemed insane in the High Court in Dundee and was ordered to be detained without limit at the state hospital. However, that would not be the end of Robert's crimes. In 1976, he broke out of Carstairs Hospital with fellow inmate and lover Thomas McCulloch. They had plotted the escape for ages, collecting weapons to help them do so. During their bid for freedom, they murdered another inmate and a male nurse and also killed a police officer before eventually being recaptured. Robert's partner in crime, Thomas, was released in 2013 and is believed to be living in Dundee now. Robert's in his 70s and remains in prison, and he is Scotland's longest serving prisoner. For the outside world, these expectant parents had a picture-perfect life. What happened next would prove that that couldn't have been further from the truth. Joshua Hilberling was 23 years old. He'd been married to his wife Amber for around a year, and the pair lived in an apartment in Oklahoma. Now, Amber was 19 and the pair were known to have quite a volatile relationship and regularly get into arguments. Joshua's parents stated that Amber would abuse him throughout the relationship. He'd apparently even visited a domestic violence intervention service to seek help. Now, Joshua actually filed a protective order against Amber after an incident in which she hit him across the head with a lamp. It was so bad that he had to go to hospital and get stitches. Joshua reportedly wanted to leave Amber, but he felt trapped as she was 7 months pregnant with his child. The protective order was never finalised as the pair never turned up to court. On the 7th of June 2011, the pair had another one of their serious fights. This one, though, would be the last fight they would ever have. Shockingly, in the middle of a disagreement, Amber pushed Joshua out of their window of their 25th floor apartment. He fell to his death, and Amber was soon arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Amber's lawyers would argue that Joshua was the abuser in the relationship and that she pushed him in self-defense. Amber claimed that Joshua was kicked out of the US Air Force for substance abuse, and this is one factor that she said caused serious arguments between them. In court, though, a jury did find her guilty of second-degree murder and she got 25 years in prison. Amber gave birth to a baby boy and her family took over custody. On October the 26th, 2016, after Amber served 3 years in prison, she was found deceased in her cell. A coroner ruled that her death was a self-unaliving. Do you notice anything odd about this last photo of this girl alive? It was 2012 and Alicia Bromfield from Illinois was 21 years old. She was a student at Western Illinois University, just one semester away from graduating. She was studying forensic psychology and criminal justice and was 6 months pregnant. She'd already picked the name Ava for her unborn baby girl. Now, although the father of the baby wasn't around, she was preparing for single motherhood. Little did she know, neither her nor her unborn child would survive much longer. 36-year-old Brian Cooper was Alicia's boss at Home Depot. The two seemed fairly close and sometimes met outside of work and walked Brian's dog. There was never anything romantic between them, though. Brian was actually very abusive to Alicia. He would call her derogatory names in front of members of staff and shockingly even customers. He was even witnessed throwing things at her, but she felt that she had to stay in the job. She knew she was soon about to be a mother, so she was worried about the financial implications of not having a job. Brian continued to bully Alicia and make her life miserable. He would purposely make her work extra hours just so he could spend extra time with her. She actually started to report this to management, but nothing was ever done. In August 2012, he started pressuring her to attend his sister's wedding with him. She didn't want to go, but he threatened to sack her if she didn't. Her mum was really concerned about Alicia being forced to go to this wedding. Alicia reassured her, however, that she was simply going as a friend and that they'd be back the next day. Alicia's mum was comforted by the fact that Brian told Alicia they were going to be staying at the same hotel as the rest of the wedding party. This was the Sand Bay Resort in Wisconsin. However, this was a lie. On the 17th of August, the pair drove 4 hours to the hotel, and when they got there, Alicia realised that they weren't staying in the same hotel as everyone else. They got into an argument about this, and the argument escalated when Brian made sexual advances to Alicia. She told her mum on the phone that she was really fed up with how he was acting and that she'd lost her patience with him. She told Brian that they would go to the wedding together, but they would not remain friends afterwards. They went to the wedding together and Brian got more and more drunk as the evening went on. Afterwards, they went back to the hotel and got into their separate beds for the evening. When Brian started harassing Alicia again, she again rejected him, and this time he launched a vicious attack. He dragged her to the ground and strangled her. She screamed out, "Think of the baby," but he didn't, and he killed her. He then AR'd her body as she lay deceased. The next morning, he showed up to a local petrol station and asked to use the phone. He rang police and admitted to intentionally killing her. He said, "I'm a good person besides what I did last night. Alicia's family is going to flip, everyone is going to flip." Police raced to the scene and arrested him. They found Alicia's body nude in the hotel room with just a blanket covering her. It was later discovered that Brian had been so obsessed with Alicia that he'd actually been recording her with spy cameras. He was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and given 2 life sentences.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This one really is heartbreaking. I'm going to put a trigger warning on this straight away. It's a tough one to listen to. Nia Glassy was folded into a ball and placed into a tumble dryer on high heat for 30 minutes. She was just 3 years old. She practically became the poster child for child abuse in New Zealand back in 2007, but the tumble dryer wasn't what killed her. That she survived, and she went on to suffer horrific abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend, his brother and other family members before eventually passing away. Nia's mother, Lisa Cooker, was 35 at the time of Nia's death, and she was in a relationship with Wiramu Curtis, who was just 17. Nia had other siblings, but for some reason she was singled out, and she was practically used as a punch bag by Wiramu and his brother Michael. Other family members were often at the house, and they witnessed the abuse but did absolutely nothing. These 2 monsters would practice wrestling moves on Nia. She'd have chunks of wood dropped on her. She was often kicked, beaten, slapped and jumped on. She was held over a burning fire, flung against walls, spun on an outdoor clothes area until she was thrown off, and one of the other children in the house recalled how Wiramu had picked Nia up by her hips and neck, and once she reached the ceiling, he let go. The final blow came in July 2007 when Nia was violently kicked in the head. Despite clearly being injured and unconscious, Nia was left on the floor, and when her mother Lisa came home from work, she too didn't call an ambulance. She put Nia in the bath and then put her to bed. She then spent the night partying with her boyfriend and other family members while they celebrated a 21st birthday. By the time Nia was taken to hospital, it had been 36 hours since the fatal blow, and she couldn't survive her injuries. She did fight for another 13 days on life support, but she passed away on August 3rd, 2007. During Nia's hospitalisation, her mother Lisa was spotted partying in various clubs, and that just sickens me. During the investigation into Nia's death, practically all of the adults in that house tried to blame each other, but ultimately it was the testimonies of the other children that lived there that led to their arrests. Following a 4-week trial in November 2008, Nia's mother Lisa was found guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. She was actually paroled in 2015, but she was sent back to prison after breaking her release conditions. However, she has now since been released. 2 other family members were found guilty of child abuse and sentenced to jail time, but have 2 now been released. Wiramu Curtis and his brother Michael Curtis were both found guilty of Nia's murder, and they were both sentenced to life in prison. The presiding judge wept as she read out the sentences, and she offered counselling to all members of the jury. Singer-songwriter Maisie Rika actually wrote a song dedicated to Nia, and you can find it on YouTube, but be warned, you will need tissues.
This might be the most disturbing case in human history, and before I begin, you've been warned. On January 19th, 1996, the mutilated remains of Diao Aquing, who disappeared 9 days prior, were found across multiple locations in China. Her body had been dismembered into over 2,000 pieces. The case remains unsolved, and it's one of the most notorious crimes in Chinese history. On January 10th, 1996 in the evening, Diao and her college roommate were punished for the illegal use of an electric appliance. After a conflict with the dormitory management, she left the building and did not return. Diao was last seen alive wearing a red coat with a black lining. She was reported missing, but her family was not notified by the authorities until January 19th. The discovery of Diao's remains in the winter of January 19th was first reported by a sanitary worker. Initially, he thought it was pork, so he brought it home for food. And while preparing the meat for himself, 3 human fingers were found in it. The worker then reported the discovery to the police, and they confirmed they were human fingers. Human remains in plastic-wrapped packages were eventually discovered across 8 locations around the university, including at a stadium, entrance gate, hospital, and along roadsides. The police later confirmed that the scattered remains were of Diao's and informed her father to visit Beijing. Between January 20th and 30th, Diao's head and clothes were found. More than 2,000 human remains were recovered. Diao's head and internal organs were boiled for several days. Crucial organs including the heart, liver, and spleen were never found. The forensics team was only able to identify the remains as belonging to a female through the analysis of body hair and muscle tissue. Relatives of Diao were able to identify her through a mole on her right cheek. A senior officer involved in the case described the killing as really cruel, which in my opinion is a nice way to put it. The officer also added that the pieces of flesh were dissected with high precision, only achieved by an individual with great understanding of anatomy. Police concluded that the murderer must have been a professional butcher or surgeon. Teachers and students then became the subject of investigation. 2 suspect profiles were brought up, including a single physical fit middle-aged male. However, the university department could not find any individuals that matched the characteristics of the profile. A major investigation was launched in the university and the areas around, but no major clues of the crime were found and the case failed to make any progress. In 2016, Nanjing police told the family of Diao that the case is still under investigation. Okay, so let's talk about this case for a second. If the killer was never found and he had the skill to dissect somebody into 2,000 pieces and never get caught with it, don't you think he might be a serial killer? And if he was, how many more people do you think he murdered after Diao? The dedication and skill, and honestly the obsession to cut somebody into 2,000 pieces and not get caught with it is crazy. This person could be walking around the streets of China today doing the same things to other people that he did to Diao. The thought of that is absolutely disturbing, and may Diao rest in peace.
This is a bit of a different one for me. I was recently contacted by a mother whose son died in 2020 under suspicious circumstances. Angie Solomon contacted me and she asked me to cover her son's death. So I really do want to get this out to as many people as possible so that she can get some signatures on her petition to open an investigation into her son's death, because something doesn't seem right. So the last person to see Grant alive was his own father, Aaron Solomon. This is a man who is very well connected in Nashville, Tennessee, where they lived and where Grant died. He's a former radio host, TV host, news anchor, and he has a lot of connections very high up. He's also a man that's abused his family for years, Grant, his mother, and Grant's little sister, who he sexually abused for years from a very young age, even raping her at one point. Grant promised his little sister Gracie that once he turned 18, he would do everything he could, everything in his power to protect her and get her away from their father. Just after he turned 18 was when he was killed. So this is Angie with Grant, and She's asked me to cover this story just to get it out there and get as many details out there as possible, because something doesn't seem right, doesn't add up. There are so many little bits to this story when I've looked into it that just don't add up. They seem very suspicious, and there was never a proper investigation done into his death. So she has a petition on her page. If you go onto her profile, I will tag her. On her link tree, there is a petition, and she needs 300,000 signatures. She's so close. She's got over 200,000, and she needs an investigation opening into her son's death. So I'll take you back to the day that he died. So it was July 20th, 2020, and Grant had recently had COVID. He'd also been diagnosed with asthma and wasn't feeling 100% himself. Grant was a baseball player, and on this day, his dad Aaron had scheduled a private baseball session for them at a local sports club, despite the fact that Aaron had just had COVID, just been diagnosed with asthma, and wasn't feeling himself. So Aaron has given multiple different stories about what happened that morning, but they basically all end with Grant ending up underneath his truck, pinned underneath his truck, and this is what killed him, according to Aaron. So in one version of events, Aaron says that he was in his own car checking work emails when he heard a loud bang. He looked up to see Grant's truck in the ditch at the end of the parking lot, and Grant was trapped underneath. Another version is that Aaron saw Grant stood behind his truck when it started rolling backwards, dragging him underneath and pinning him underneath his truck inside the ditch. Aaron called 911 and told them what had happened. But to me, it sounds like he's talking to someone else while he's on the phone to 911, and he claimed that 3 men were also there with him. These 3 men were never found. He never really mentioned them again. They were never tracked down for an interview or anything like that by police, so that doesn't sound right to me.
Somehow it drug him underneath it. Yes, my son is under it. I'm trying to call 911.
Okay, what's your name?
Oh my God. My name is Aaron Solomon.
And you said
oh
you're
my God.
at 1357 South Water Avenue, right?
Yes.
How old
yes.
is the male?
He's 18. He just turned 18 a couple weeks, about a month ago. It's my son. Oh my God. Oh my God, this is not good.
Is he awake and
oh, please hurry.
To you?
I don't think so. He's not alert, right? No, he's out. And he's trapped. I got 3 guys here, and he's trapped under the truck.
Okay.
Oh, my God.
I understand, sir. Stay on the phone with me while we get somebody out there. What's your name?
Aaron Solomon.
Something about that phone call to me just doesn't seem genuine. If that was one of my children trapped under a truck, unresponsive, I would be frantic. I'd be panicking. He's very calm, almost like he's rehearsed what he's going to say, whether he's played out that day in his head a few times and he knew exactly what he was going to say to 911. I'm not sure. But to also not be anywhere near his son at that point, he was stood up at the top of the parking lot where I'm guessing his car was. He wasn't even down there where Grant's truck was. You'd be on the floor trying to speak to your son, surely, if that was your son trapped under there. This is where it gets really, really weird. So there wasn't a scratch on Grant's body. To say that he'd been knocked down by his car, he'd been dragged down the parking lot into a ditch, there wasn't a scratch. The hospital said that there was a laceration to the back of his head and that he died from blunt force trauma. And on looking at Grant's belongings in his truck, there was a baseball bat missing. So he had a few large baseball bats, he had 2 baseball gloves, and his small aluminium baseball bat was nowhere to be found, and it's never been found. Another thing that's really weird is that Aaron said to Gracie after Grant's death that nothing would happen to his truck, he wouldn't sell it. He drove around in it for a few months and then claimed that it was totaled in the accident and claimed the insurance money. So Angie actually managed to track down the truck in Florida and she bought it back. And it's really, really weird. There was blood splatter inside the vehicle. It was also underneath the truck, but how it got inside the vehicle, if he was killed by getting knocked down outside his truck, I have no idea. And when she got the black box looked at, it gets even weirder. So the black box in Grant's truck shows that in the last 3 seconds that the ignition was on, there was somebody sat in the driver's seat, the accelerator was pushed down, the steering wheel was turned sharply to the right, and then the truck was put in park and the ignition was turned off. Now that can't have been Grant because he was supposedly underneath the truck. Also, according to a witness at the scene, Aaron was seen speaking to police, I'm guessing giving a statement, and then the police received a phone call, and shortly after that phone call, the police left and just took Aaron's word and his version of events for what happened. There was no proper investigation done whatsoever. Even just looking at the scene here, it looks like that truck's been driven into that ditch. It doesn't look like it's rolled the other way. I mean, this piece of grass, supposedly Grant was dragged over this by his truck. Would that not all be flattened down if a person had been dragged over it? It just, nothing adds up with this story. None of the details make sense. Aaron's story doesn't make sense. And if it was my son, I have 3 sons myself, and if this was one of them, I would be doing exactly what Angie is doing, because she deserves justice, and so does Grant. So I will tag her, as I've said. Please go to her profile. She's got her petition in her link tree, and I hope to God that an investigation gets opened, because she deserves justice for her son.